Hi, I'm Amy McDonald, Director of CitySpace. Welcome to our in-person audience and our virtual audience. I just lost my train of thought. I just wanted. Such a good-looking crowd. Thank you for submitting your questions. They were terrific questions, and Tiziana plans to get to as many of them as possible tonight. I encourage you all to tune into Radio Boston tomorrow at 3 p.m., 90.9 FM. Tiziana and her producers are going to play a 20-minute excerpt of this event tonight, so you may hear your question on air. I also encourage you to mark your calendars for Monday, October 25th, to watch the final last debate between the two candidates on WCVB TV at 7 p.m. This is a consortium of the Globe, WBUR, the McCormick Graduate School at UMass, and WCVB. And Tiziana is one of the moderators again. A couple of housekeeping notes. Turn off your cell phones if you haven't already. And if you're not sipping on your Pepsi or wine or chewing on snacks, remember to put your masks on. Tiziana, take it away.
Thank you. Everyone hearing me okay? Yeah. Great. Thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Can't wait.
I know. So we will see each other in a debate format next Monday night, and you've done a ton of debates. I have a different goal. We have a different goal here, which is we can stretch out and have a conversation. I can ask you questions you can't ask in a debate format or where there's not the kind of time to answer them. So with less than 2 weeks to go, my goal in these town halls is for people to really get to know who our two candidates are, because one of you is going to be in people's lives deeply for the next 4 years. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to ask you some questions to kind of get us started. We have taken a number of questions from the audience as well. I will then sort of splice them in, and we have an hour together, and off we go.
Can't wait. Let's go.
Okay, so I'm going to start by asking you essentially the same first question that I asked your opponent on Monday night. And it's a question about who you are. We have heard a ton about the fact that one of you will be a first. In fact, one of you will be many firsts. And I guess I'd like to know, is that part of the draw of leading the city now? Is it incidental? And more to the point, when you tell yourself who you are, who do you say you are?
All right, that's a deep question. Here we go. So, of course, I appreciate that this election signifies a big change for Boston. You know, sort of the face of leadership will look very different for the next, and we know Boston's history, for the next 4, 8, maybe 12 years, maybe longer. I don't know if elected officials will, especially here in Boston, will be in office as long as we think, you know, traditionally mayors of Boston have been in place. So it certainly weighs on me that this is a very special election for the people of Boston when they look at representation, when they look at the face of the experiences of and the backgrounds of the two of us that are left running for mayor. It is significant to me in, I think, a different way than the public sees it, and I appreciate how important this election is to people who don't see a reflection of themselves generally in leadership, and certainly not in the mayor's office. To me, it's much more personal, and it goes to my dad. You know, I have always had an interest in municipal government since I was a young girl, since I was a teenager. I was a little bit of a student activist during my high school years, growing up here in Boston, and became engaged in and involved in my student council at my high school, Boston Tech. I like to, is this streaming anywhere? Are we looking, is there a camera? Streaming. Okay, go Tech Tigers. I like to say that out loud, which is now the O'Brien. And I found, I think for myself, a passion in leadership, in activism, in standing up for things that I thought were wrong or heading in the wrong direction or not being paid attention to in the way that they should. So I had this moment in time that my mother actually remembers much clearer than I do. We were at a big meeting around budget cuts around my school. Lots of people there. My mother says there was close to 5,000 people there. That might have been the rally, so she might be conflating two different things. But I remember we had a school community meeting with then Mayor Flynn, students, parents, and they were talking very specifically about budget cuts. And I said something to the effect of, you know, this is crazy. Like, government's supposed to work for the people. City Hall is supposed to work for the people and the kids. And I was a student activist. and went home and told my father, I'm going to run for mayor someday. And he said to me very plainly, an Arab girl with an Arab name will win nothing in this city. And so I have internalized that most of my life, and I appreciate the experiences my dad had, in particular, immigrating to this country as an Arab, as a Muslim, as a foreigner, trying to find his way, both with my mother and my grandparents, but also within community, but then also within the wider world. And I'd say, because we are here on BU's campus, because we are on Comm Ave, how important Boston University was to him and to me. My father was a security guard at BU, and I think it was when he arrived here to work at BU that he met so many different people, and he just really loved being here. Anyway, I digress. So I have always seen this as an opportunity for myself, and I feel in many ways I'm fulfilling that promise I made, maybe to Ray Flynn, Mayor Flynn, Ambassador Flynn, to responding to the challenge that my father made to me. But also, as I got older, as I had real life experiences, as I went to college and eventually went to the workplace and eventually started teaching, that I saw, wow, like there are important voices and experiences and things that are missing in local government, municipal government. And that's when I decided to run the first time for city councilor at large, because there were those experiences. And I think a lot about being a mother. I think a lot about being a business owner. I think a lot about being a teacher. And I believe that it's my experience in the classroom that has brought me to this moment, because what we do in our schools impacts so many people. So when I think about, I think I've gone off a little bit here, but when I think about who I am, when I think about what makes me tick and what my passion is, it's a couple of things. It's the city. It is the opportunity that Boston has given to me and given to my family, although not all of it was wonderful. Not all of it was sunshine and roses. And I believe that Boston is the center of the world. It's the center of the universe. It is a championship city that still has some failings. I experienced them firsthand, especially as a young kid. I know that my parents experienced them as immigrants, especially my dad. I experience them today, for sure, but it is still the most fantastic place. And I talk about it on the campaign trail a little bit. I refer to, we talk a lot about the American dream, especially being a daughter of immigrants, the American dream. I talk about, and I find myself reflecting on the promise of Boston. So Boston's promise, what it meant to my family. My mother, when she immigrated here as a little girl, my father as a young man, and then building a family here in the city. And I feel that I am the fulfillment of the Boston promise. What it means to so many people, what it means to so many residents, whether they're born and raised, and we can talk a lot about that because that's been in the news a lot lately, whether they immigrated as my parents did many years ago, 47 years ago and plus for my mother, or they just arrived. I met a young man out here during the standout who just, he's here for school. And Boston should fulfill that promise to everybody along that spectrum, whether they live their entire life here or just a moment.
So what is one way that the city failed you as a kid that makes you say, never again?
I think that the city should never let down, I think sometimes about school. I think about the academic failings that we've had as a district. And I went from Catholic grammar school to public high school, and I had some challenges in both. And although high school for me, especially because of I think the high school I went to, Boston Tech, go Tech Ties, it was a place that I felt so at home because of the diversity in my school, because I met kids who came from all over the city, because I met kids from different ethnic backgrounds, certainly racial backgrounds, religious backgrounds, which I went to a Catholic grammar school, so there wasn't that diversity in high school, in grammar school, the way there was at my high school. And I also felt at that moment I was able to find my voice. I still struggled academically after I graduated from high school and went on to college. I think that although I was a good student, college was a struggle for me. And I worry about our kids that we don't fully prepare for college and for work and for life. So I think, and I don't want to say that the city failed me. There are weaknesses in our system as a city. And I know with all of the opportunity I had, if there were weaknesses I experienced, that there were failings for other young people. There were failings for other families. And I think about them in my work every single day. And every day I am committed to doing more and doing better. So that if there was a weakness for me and a failing for somebody else, that we're improving the system along the way.
I miss my mom. I miss her a lot. And one of the things we used to do, sometimes I would just get a chance to do something cool, right? Or that I never thought I would do, and I would call her and we would go, right? That was one of the things I would do with my mom. I've been thinking a lot about your father.
You're gonna make me cry. I'm not cry. Well, maybe I'm a little bit of a crier, but.
I am too. The way you talk about him, and I have wondered, has there been some moment during this campaign where you wish you could have talked to him?
Every moment. And I'd say most especially, you are going to make me cry, because my father, my father worked at BU and he died at BU. And so I feel especially close to him. I did my makeup for this. Are you kidding me?
I'm sorry.
Someone get me a tissue.
Actually, could someone get her a tissue, please?
And I think that, so when I'm at BU, when I'm around BU, I feel especially close to him. And actually, the day I announced my candidacy, because I think about him quite a bit, the day I announced my candidacy, there was a few of us in the car, and we were doing a whole bunch of, thank you, Karen.
Perfect.
We were doing a whole bunch of, look at this, look at it, in case I keep crying. I forgot to put that spray afterwards on my makeup so it wouldn't run all over my face.
It is not running.
If there's ugly crying, my friends in the audience, you gotta let me know we're gonna have problems.
It's not running.
So when I, thank you.
Yeah.
So when I, listen, the people of Boston, you're gonna get it all. You're gonna get it all. The good, the bad, and the ugly crying. So after the announcement, I actually came here. I said, I wanna come to BU, because this was the last place that he was alive. And although I feel him with me every day, and I have a pendant with his picture. Anyway, so I think of him often, and I actually talk about him out loud often, because we had a complicated, I'm the oldest Arab daughter to an Arab Muslim man, and I was raised Catholic. So we had a lot of conflict over the years. And he pushed me, he inspired me, he made me crazy. But he motivated me sometimes in like sort of a roundabout way. He told me I couldn't be mayor, and I said, I'm gonna show you. And I'm 47 years old, and I still think about my 15, 16-year-old self. I'm an adult with lots of accomplishments to run on, but I think about my father. I say he would have been my biggest cheerleader, and also probably one of my most thoughtful critics over the course of this campaign. He would have knocked more doors, he would have made more phone calls, he would have worked his tail off until the polls close at that exact moment. And I know that there are, and I meet people actually frequently enough that would say, oh man, your father, he would have been a machine over the course of this campaign. I actually received an email early in the campaign after one of my appearances somewhere from a student who knew him and said, oh, please send your father my regards. We used to talk, he was an Italian student, foreign student. And he goes, we would talk about the soccer matches and that sort of stuff. And I love that. That I love. So anyone watching that knew my father, please send me a message, something good about him. Don't tell me he busted you in a dorm party or something like that. So I think that I try to internalize his strength along the way. He came from a place, Tunisia, lived a very different life than we do here in the United States, had very different experiences, left home. He's one of 17 children, grew up in a very traditional Arab village. My grandfather was the sheikh of Jalma, which is the place where my dad grew up. There is a female mayor of Tunis, the capital of Tunisia, and it was a big, actually, this is a good story. They couldn't figure out what to call her because it was the first time they had elected a female, and I met her. It was the first time they elected a female mayor of Tunis, the capital city. They didn't know what to call her, and they're like, I don't know, Sheikah? And that was and they figured it out. And she is the sheikh of the Medina. She is the mayor of the capital city. And they've worked it out. Like, we'll be fine, Boston. Everyone's heads are exploding that we'll be fine. Anyway, so you've got me all up in knots here.
So I'm going to ask you one more.
ahead.
I'm going to ask you one more, and then we'll go into some issues too. So identity is huge,
Yes.
again, in this campaign. And you've taken all kinds of pushback on identity. You've taken pushback from people on self-identifying.
Pushback is kind.
As a woman of color.
Pushback is a kind way to describe it.
So I want to ask about that, because I want to ask you what it is like to have someone else adjudicate your identity. And were you expecting this? And how have you taken care of yourself during it?
Well, I've had a good cry here with all of you. So lots of people and lots of powers have inserted themselves in this conversation about who I am, what I'm supposed to identify as. In fact, they've said what I should sound like throughout the course of this campaign. And it has been frustrating, it has been maddening, it has been hurtful. It has also been, in many ways, motivating, and there's another word I want to use, but, Arabs, so we talk about racial identity, Arabs have never counted, and that has been a difficult thing for my father in particular. Because
What do you mean by that, never counted?
Well, there's no box for us to check. So, and the BUR did a big story today. You can go read it. It's actually, I think, pretty well written. And Soraya spent a lot of time talking to me about that, talking to me about my father in particular, my story, his story.
That one was actually GBH.
Sorry.
But Anthony Brooks did one on you today, too.
Fact check. That can go out in the tweet. Thank you. No. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, yes, well, whatever. There's a couple of stories out there. There's a few
Two
more. Thank you. So, Arabs as a community have always been sort of in this no man's land, or shall I say nomad's land, as we try to find our place in the world. And a lot of that relates to where in the world you've come from, whether it's North Africa in particular or the Middle East in particular. It also is tied to your religious beliefs and which religion you are. And it also ties to, I think, whether or not you wear a head cover as a female or dress in religious or cultural clothing. I think that has an impact on it as well. And I have had an absolute privilege in the way that I present, that I get to exist in lots of different rooms and lots of different cultural rooms. I can hang out in white rooms, I can hang out in Arab rooms, I can hang out in black rooms, I can hang out in Latino rooms. There are lots of places in which I can exist. The struggle I have had is in each and every one of those rooms, including the Arab rooms, especially as a non-Muslim and a non-Arab speaker, that I don't always have a seat at the table. And I struggle with that, and that's a personal struggle for me, recognizing and appreciating that how I present also creates a great deal of privilege for me, and I'll never deny that privilege. When I joined the City Council in 2016, I was invited to the Electeds of Color meeting, and I finally felt, wow, like I'm gonna be in a room with people who feel sometimes like me, set aside, not fully counting, not fully represented, not fully able to engage in the conversation. And I was grateful for that opportunity. And it was just, I went to the meetings, I engaged, I do a great deal of work, especially when I think about our communities of color, when I think about vulnerable populations, when I think about our schools, especially because our schools have impacted in such a negative way so many of our kids of color across our city, that I really have played I think a critical role in improving the opportunities for our families of color across the city. And so now I'm running for mayor, and there's this conversation. And it becomes frustrating at times because I really want to just do this work. And I've been criticized for not sharing publicly more of my personal story, more of my family's struggles, both mine personally and then my family's as a whole. But I also feel that the people of Boston who are suffering, who are struggling, who need services, who need government to act, who need their elected officials to engage in the work, deserve that. And it's not for me to reflect on my own story, although I appreciate how important that can be to the work, that I need to do the work. The part that's been even more hurtful than that conversation, because that's always been a part of my life. On applications, and I know my teacher application came out this week around, oh, will you check the white box? Well, my mother is white. There is no Arab box, and I'm not black, and African American as a box is designated for Black Americans. And I know that. And oftentimes, many applications would say African American of non-Arab descent. And so this year, or last year now, I was grateful to engage with the Arab American Institute in some of their national efforts around getting a box on the census so that Arabs could be counted. And then even within the Arab community, there's such diversity. But that's a different conversation, and there's some conflict around Pan-Arabism versus being a Tunisian or a Moroccan or a Libyan. Or throughout the rest of the region. The part that has been especially frustrating, especially in the last few weeks, was following a New York Times article, sort of having a little bit of fun with my Boston accent, which I'm very proud of. There was an article, an opinion piece in the Globe, which, to simplify it, called me a racist because I speak with a Boston accent. And I found that hateful, frustrating, ignorant, hurtful, and I say hurtful twice on purpose because it was very hurtful. That is, my father was an immigrant, and I think about my father, and I'm sure my mother came here so young. I'm sure it was also her experience and my grandparents' experience, but my father came here as a young man, spoke very little English. My mother happened to speak French, that's how they communicated, and had a heavy, heavy accent. And I know as a convenience store worker, as a taxi cab driver, as a hotel worker, that he was mocked for his accent, that he was told to go home because of his accent, that he was called a towelhead because of his accent, that he was called a terrorist because of his accent. And then to have the Globe, a major Boston newspaper, come after me personally because I speak with and am proud of my Boston accent, made me absolutely bananas. And my team will say, Annissa, don't let them know they got under your skin. That got under my goddamn skin because I thank you. We wouldn't accept any media fat shaming me. We wouldn't accept any media poking fun on, but that is part of me. And yes, in my victory speech, I had a crowd on election night, a crowd of hundreds of people. And we had so much fun with that damn commercial. It was fun. And to turn something that was fun into something nasty was hurtful. It was not unnecessary is too light of a word to use. I think it was, I have nothing else to say about it.
So how do you make space for, or when you are confronted by someone who doesn't support you or feels that that accent means to them that they may be less considered in your leadership? How do you talk about that?
So I'll tell you, this right here helped because I haven't talked out loud about it on the record in front of a camera and an audience. So I appreciate that opportunity. The therapy bill, just send it to me later. I think that is unacceptable for someone to say that, because this place, Boston, is such an incredibly diverse city with so many languages spoken, accents. Walk up Comm Ave tonight. Walk in to Agganis Arena, there's an event happening, or go into the bar room, or go into a restaurant, or go into the bookstore, or go into the convenience store. Or stand at the check-in booth at the dorms where my father used to work. You will hear every accent spoken. And to come after someone's accent, if I spoke with a different accent, that writer would be terminated, would be fired tomorrow from that newspaper.
Okay. So I want to move into the issues. I'm actually going to start with an audience question, and my earpiece keeps popping out, so we're just going to keep messing with it over here. We're all being very transparent with what's going on. I'm going to start with an audience question, then I have a couple too, and I'm going to start with policing.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to stick this back in. I'm going to start with policing, in part because it is one of the areas where you really differ in some important ways from your opponent. So I'm going to start with an audience question. This is Leslie from Jamaica Plain. And Leslie asks, formerly incarcerated individuals experience discrimination and exclusion barriers from private and public housing. Public housing authorities and landlords have the discretion to deny housing based on criminal background checks, despite the fact that those returning from incarceration are 10 times more likely upon reentry to become homeless than the general public. Legislators have turned a blind eye on this vulnerable population, leaving families with nowhere to go. As a result, Massachusetts has a high recidivism rate, and we did look it up. Most recent data from the Department of Correction is 32%. And others remain transient, living in squalor, couch surfing, or living on mass and cast in tents. If elected, how would you address this issue? And what I'm going to ask you to do here, I'm going to talk about people coming out of incarceration. We'll do mass and cast in a bit.
Perfect. So I'm thank you, Leslie, wherever you are, for that question and bringing up that very important topic. I've had over the last 6 years as an at-large city councilor, I've spent a lot of my time and energy focused on the crisis of homelessness. Set aside mass and cast, although there is a direct relationship to this conversation. And the work that we need to do around returning citizens, around individuals who are experiencing incarceration and now coming home is certainly critically important when we think about ending homelessness in our city. We did early in my campaign because I knew that it was a missing component to the work that we were doing as a city. There's some work that was happening through our Office of Returning Citizens, but the resources they have is small, almost nothing. The manpower and the people doing the work is small, almost nothing. And so I had, at a couple of different spots, had met some individuals, men and women, who were formerly incarcerated and really struggling with readjustment and accessing just sort of the things that they need in which to exist in society and to even apply for a rental. Never mind get denied for housing. They didn't even have their IDs and things like that to even start the application process. So we said, we've been hearing a lot about this. Now I'm running for mayor, so I'm hearing more and more from people who need things fixed. And so we pulled together a Zoom, still early in the campaign, and with a number of individuals at different stages of returning home. And the challenges around IDs, accessing birth certificates, getting documentation to re-enter society, never mind the housing piece, is such a bundle. We've made a bundled mess of it. And so I've committed and had some follow-up meetings to investing in an Office of Returning Citizens that actually engages in our corrections facilities and starts day one of incarceration. Almost everyone that's incarcerated is returning home at some point. And we need to make sure that at that first day that we're starting that process of returning. And in that folder, whatever magical folder, digital folder, a license, your birth certificate, your critical, your credentials, whatever those pieces of documentation you need should be in there. And then we as a city should be working in partnership directly on site, not somewhere else with sometimes visits, on site with individuals so that return home to community, to family, to social network, family network is an easier one. And then we have to work with our state legislature on that CORI reform. CORI reform is so important. And if someone has done their time, has paid their debt to society, they should be welcomed home, because then if they don't, they end up part of the cycle of homelessness. And we also have to fix a few things, and this I learned from my conversations with a group of people with lived experiences around the parole fee and the probation fees, and how from day one that sets them back as individuals and makes it so much more difficult to re-engage in society. Workforce development has to be a part of that too. And we can do so much of that skilled training behind the wall during incarceration so that they're more prepared to re-enter society. I also want to emphasize how important mental health services are during that time. If there is substance use disorder, a sort of an underlying issue that also exists, we find that. We've got to treat that as well, but mental health has to be a critical component of that care while incarcerated, and finding ways to continue some of those relationships during a return to community and to home.
You talked about people as they're leaving incarceration, talking about people entering incarceration. At a systems level, is our criminal justice system here in the Commonwealth inherently racist?
Yes. And more than just our criminal justice system. We see racism in education, in housing, in transit, in public health, and just in healthcare in general. In policing, we see it across the board. We've got so much work to do to dismantle where across those systems it's broken and fix it for people that are hurting every single day because of those systems.
So I'm going to ask you a question about policing, and I'm going to give you two frames, right? So we're talking about police reform. You have a number of items in your platform. You've talked about OPAT. You've talked about making sure to implement all the recommendations of the Police Reform Task Force that Mayor Walsh put in place in the summer of 2020. There is a critical frame that says when you have strong support from law enforcement, when you have, as the Bay State Banner reported, more than $150,000 in individual donations from law enforcement, it makes it hard to be a reformer. It makes it unlikely that you will be. There is a second framing in change leadership that says one is more effective in leading change when one has trust from the people whose change you need. I want to know if you think there's a bit of both there and how you respond to the first and how you think about the second.
Sure. I appreciate the way that you phrased that question. I think that there is, in order to achieve the change we need, we've got to do this work in partnership with our Boston Police Department. In order to achieve those full reforms, in order to achieve that accountability, in order to achieve that greater diversity, you need to, and we use this line on the campaign trail because it has to be core to the work that we do, making sure that we have systems in place that are just and that we have a city that is safe. To dismantle and to defund the Boston Police Department will not get us to that end result. We've got to do this work. We have to do this work together. Now, I will say around the fundraising bit, how much did I raise from police officers?
So the Bay State Banner reports that you have over $150,000 in individual donations, and there is research that suggests that when you have support from an interest group, you're going to be in line with that interest group.
Right. So a couple of things I want to push back on that. I am very proud to have been born and raised in this city. I'm very proud to have been engaged both as, and if I'm thinking through my head where some of those dollars have come from, kids I've gone to kindergarten with, kids I've gone to grammar school with, a lot of kids, there's a lot of tech tigers on the Boston Police Force, kids I've gone to high school with, kids I've gone to college with, and maybe a few. And kids young people now, that's my childhood years. Families that I've gotten to know at the Little League field, families I've gotten to know at the soccer field, families I've gotten to know at the hockey rink.
So how do you deliver the hard messages?
So I will also say, because I have those relationships, and relationships are core to the work that we need to do as a city, because I've also been friends with individuals who have been incarcerated. I've also been friends with people who have lost loved ones at the hands of police. I've also been I'm friends with people who have been victims of police brutality. It is as someone who has been so invested in this city and the work of this city, it is important to build all of those relationships. And I'm also proud to say that I have received the most of all the candidates, if we go back even pre-preliminary, that I have the highest number of contributions from individuals who live in the city of Boston and work in the city of Boston and work for the city of Boston. And I think that speaks to my ability to build relationships. And I have not asked for the endorsement of the Patrolmen's Union, for example, because we aren't in a good spot in which I feel they are fully embracing the work that I'd like to see them do. Does that mean I don't have conversations with them? Does that mean we don't do this work together? I don't believe so. And in order to be an agent of change, in order to do this very important work of making sure we have a city that is both safe and just, You need to have those relationships with those that we're asking to go out every single day, to work doubles every single day, to try to do their work in a very different way. When we think about the amount of reforms we need to put in place to make sure that we are also responding to the calls for social justice in our city.
All right, so let's go to Mass and Cass. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pair a question from an audience member with a question that I have for you. So Patrick from Hyde Park asks, as a worker in the Melnia Cass neighborhood, what would you do to improve the situation? So that's Patrick's question. And I'm going to ask, okay, actually, let me just let you start there, but let me ask you to do me the favor of do a shorter answer there so that I can then build on it. Because I'm watching the clock.
It's also a comedy show. I'm writing down shorter answer.
Just on that.
Okay, so Mass and Cass. I've been doing the work. I've done the work. I look forward to doing more of the work. We rolled out an updated Mass and Cass plan this past Sunday to build on our earlier release plan that's built on the work that I've done as a member of the City Council. We need to decentralize services, meet people where they are, rebuild the Long Island Bridge, and make sure that we are using all of our city's resources to get that done. I've committed $30 million of ARPA money to respond to the crisis at Mass and Cass that exists far beyond Mass and Cass. We think about Andrew Square, Edward Everett Square, Mattapan Square, Upham's Corner, Nubian Square, Downtown Crossing. We're seeing some significant increases in the North End, Kenmore. Like, it is in every part of our city. We see Mass and Cass playing out. I will also call for a public health emergency at Mass and Cass. I will work with a designee through the Boston Public Health Commission that will work with me as mayor directly so that we can have a more coordinated response within all of our city agencies, both public health and public safety. We're drawing a 1 mile radius around the Mass and Cass area so that we can saturate that place, that part of our city, with the support and the help that those individuals who are struggling every single day need. And I've been calling for a long time for a public health surge in which we do that work. I am grateful, and I mean this in all seriousness, that the acting mayor has duplicated some of my updated plan, has rolled it out through executive order this week, because that work is so important, and it will make it easier, literally. And I'm not being fresh. I know some think it's a little snarky. So on day one of my administration, I can continue that work in a more meaningful way.
Do you think she literally picked up on your plan? And did you talk to her between when your plan came out on Sunday and when the acting mayor made her executive order on Tuesday?
Yes.
Which part?
All of it.
Okay. So let's follow up on that. So this is one, because you and I have talked on Radio Boston in the past about Mass and Cass. You were on after Operation Clean Sweep, for example. Part of that plan is to remove people from tents. Part of that plan is also to not remove people from tents unless there is a place for them to go, a room, a bed. And we also know that some people don't want to go to a bed. They don't want to go to shelter for a bunch of reasons. And so I want to ask you, how does that actually work? Somebody is in a tent. That is their safe place. They have belongings that they're worried about. They may have experienced violent trauma, sexual trauma that makes coercion particularly terrifying.
I'm going to interrupt you right there. They've probably experienced it in the hours before you went to talk to them.
So how does
I've been there at night. I've been there in the early morning. I've been there in the middle of the day. I've done ride-alongs. I've done walk-alongs with public safety officials, with public health officials. I've gone by myself and had conversations. There has been a significant proliferation in tents over the last 6 months. 6 months ago, there was a handful of tents, and we'd see them scattered across the city. Beginning of the summer, late spring, we were at about 100 tents. Today, we are over 200 tents. We've had to serve search warrants on tents. We've had several instances of arson against tents. We've had increase in violence and rape and assault, especially against women in tents. We've seen also 6 murders at Mass and Cass in the last 2 months. We have seen the devastation of humanity at Mass and Cass. We've also seen a significant change in the drug market. We've gone from heroin to fentanyl to now crystal meth in everything. We've seen the...
I'm still at, how's it going to work at the tents?
We need to... we've got room in our shelter, and I understand our shelters in the city are not the best place for everybody, but we've got to move people into shelter. We've got detox beds available. We've got to get individuals into detox, but we have to make sure there is a connection to longer-term recovery with that detox, because spin dry doesn't work. The tents also do not work. There's an ordinance that was just proposed by a colleague this week on the City Council around removing the tents that are blocking public way, that are blocking private residents, that are also crime scenes in many cases. There were not great things happening at Mass and Cass, but I appreciate and want to respect the community that's been created when we think about those that are experiencing homelessness and addiction and substance use disorder and mental illness. But we also need to realize, because I had during my press conference the other day, I had a conversation with a young man that came by and asked, what are the things you need from me to help you find housing? He goes, no, I have housing. I said, why are you here today? He goes, what am I going to do at my house all by myself all day long? He goes, I'm used to living on the street. I've been on the street for 20 years. So we also need to make sure that we're doing some of the supportive housing that's necessary. Not just, there's a housing first model that says, here you go, you've got a unit, you're all set. And individuals who have lived unsheltered, who have been homeless, who are dealing with addiction and illness, mental illness in particular, they need those additional supports. We've got to look at growing our number of SROs, single room occupancies across the city that offer supports. We've seen some of the NIMBYism across our city to that. We've got a massive project that we're trying to get through in Jamaica Plain through the Pine Street Inn that neighbors are suing this SRO project that is run by an organization who has an incredible track record in helping people get better and find wellness and stability. We've got to do more of that. And we have to work with surrounding cities and towns to bring online supportive housing, to bring online shelters, because many communities have walked away from their responsibility to their people. And we need to take a look at statewide assets, closed nursing homes, closed hospitals, closed healthcare facilities that could do and participate in longer term treatment. We also need to make sure that we're focused on workforce training, because one of the challenges right now is having enough recovery coaches and supportive, people in sort of those support services to help individuals who are in crisis.
So there's more we could do on that, but I want to get to a number of other issues as well. I'm going to bring another listener question in. We have had a lot of questions. We're going to move to the environment, green space, for a little bit. We've had a lot of questions about the preservation of Crane Ledge Woods, which is a 24-acre parcel, part of which a developer is looking to build apartments on. We picked one question. This is from Marcia from Hyde Park, who asks, how will you support full conservation of Crane Ledge Woods, and how will you work to make that happen on behalf of the BIPOC majority and other residents living around it in Hyde Park, Roslindale, Mattapan, that depend on the woods for their health, for climate resilience, and for potential recreational green space?
Yeah, so I just want to thank Marsha. I know her fairly well through her community activism and participated not just in her regular community meetings, but in the meetings around Crane's Ledge in particular, which is a very large, urban wild that is privately held by a community church. And I have supported the efforts and the recommendation for the city to look at the opportunity to purchase this land. The complexities around that, though, and recognizing and realizing I've walked Crane's Ledge, I've done a pretty big loop through it with some community members to get a full lay of the landscape and the beautiful space that it is. But recognizing is there are some challenges with privately held land in our city, and the opportunity for the city to purchase it should be explored, absolutely. But also realizing that it is owned by a private entity. So unless we're going to start actively looking at opportunities for eminent domain, we've got to tread carefully in the space that
And what
is
about
known
eminent domain?
is Crane's Ledge. We have a really bad track record of a city in destroying neighborhoods through eminent domain and destroying homes and families and communities through eminent domain. It is and has to be a true exception to the rule. And when we think about the fair market value of that property, when we think about the need for additional affordable housing in our city, we've got to find the right balance. And there's been, I know with the interim administration, some negotiations and some conversations that have at least initiated. We haven't received an update on that as far as I know, through my transition team on Cranes Ledge in particular. But again, I want to be supportive and have issued support to the community that's talking about Cranes Ledge and wanting to maintain that. We've got to figure out how to make that happen without violating private property rights.
All right, so let's turn our attention to the Seaport District for a minute. And if we were looking out at it right now, one might look at it and see one of a couple of different things. One might look at it and see the power of the Boston economy manifest over a decade of new development, new businesses, innovation, tech quarter. One might look at it and see a failure to build a neighborhood that's accessible to all of the city, that failed to appropriately prepare for climate, provide green space, and provide the kinds of connective tissue that create a neighborhood. In my experience, pretty much everything is a bit of both. But I'm interested, if you were looking at that Seaport Vista, which of those framings is the first one?
So I've talked a lot about the Seaport over the course of not just this campaign, but since I ran for office the first time in 2013. And again, proud to be a city girl. If you dropped me in the middle of the Seaport, especially if I were in the middle of the Seaport, I don't know if I'd know how to get out. And it is, unfortunately, a little bit of anywhere USA. I will say, though, the most recent developments that have been built down there, just from an aesthetics perspective, have been much more thoughtful and creative, and some structural diversity has occurred in the Seaport, and I'm grateful for that, because the early growth and design of the Seaport and the buildings of that area, really for me it was anywhere USA. No sort of character to that part of the city. There is no diversity, however, though, in homeownership, in residential diversity, and the people that have been able to live in the Seaport area, and there's been no diversity around the commercial market. We've got to be much more intentional about creating those opportunities in the Seaport for people of color in particular to live, to work, and to play. And with the workplace, making sure that there's opportunities along, from entry level to, what do we call it, C-suite?
C-suite.
C-suite, all the way up for ownership, not just waitress and bartender, but ownership, equity in the opportunities that are in the Seaport. And then in both the rental market and the ownership market. There are, I think someone shared a statistic recently that there's like one homeowner of color in the Seaport.
I don't know that one.
And I may be incorrect. Someone on Twitter will fact check me, I'm sure.
Walt's going to fact check you.
Just tag me and I'll see it later. We have to do better when we think about the future of our city and making sure that every part of our city is accessible, and accessible to communities who have often been shut out of that opportunity. And we talk so much as a city, especially over the course of this campaign, but it's important to talk about it because it has to be part of the work that I do as mayor and closing the wealth gap. That's about home ownership. That's also about job force, workforce. That's about being able to put money in your pocket, put money in your bank, to invest in yourself, your family, and your community. And the Seaport has failed to do that in too many ways.
Your opponent has a lot of support for the Green New Deal for the city of Boston.
Last time I checked, the Green New Deal was a federal effort.
Your opponent has a lot of support for her proposed Green New Deal for the city of Boston. So I want to ask you what your climate resilience agenda for the city is. And one of the challenges when we address systemic change issues is it's huge. So not only what are your priorities, but what do you think the first place to start as mayor is that creates momentum for the resilience that we need?
In our communities of color, that's where we need to start. The entire conversation around climate action, the entire conversation for almost all time around environmental justice has existed in white, affluent, suburban communities. It needs to be brought into our city. It needs to be brought into our neighborhoods. It needs to be brought into East Boston, where I coach softball both at the high school and in the community. And I said this on air the other night, got a little bit of grief for it. But when I was coaching little girls in the middle of the summer at Constitution Beach, we spent most of our practice looking at the ass end of airplanes. And then we wonder, why do kids in East Boston have high rates of asthma? When I think about tree canopy and the heat island effect. We got to plant some more trees in our neighborhoods across our city. And certainly the impact of water rise, sea level rise is very real. We see that in the Seaport. We're going to see it soon in Charlestown. We see the impacts of it in East Boston, our coastal communities. We certainly need a federal effort and a regional response to the water issue in particular. But we need to make sure that our communities across our city, each and every one of our neighborhoods, but in particular our communities of color who have not had a seat at the table to work on the issues of environmental justice, they need to be at the table because they are the ones feeling the impact of it. That's important to me. That's where, for me and the Essaibi George administration, that's where that conversation needs to not just start, but exist. And when we think about the challenges around buy-in on bike lanes on American Legion Highway, it is because the people of those communities that utilize the American Legion Highway or want to have a afternoon community barbecue in Franklin Park on that side of the park are frustrated because they can't get there from here because of those bike lanes. It's because they were not part of the conversation. They were not included in the discussion, the debate, and the information sharing around why that might be important to go through the middle of their neighborhood and impact them so directly. That's important to me as we face the environmental injustices that our city's residents are dealing with every single day, that it's our city's residents who are dealing with it every single day leading that conversation.
So we did fact check on the Seaport. According to the Boston Globe, only a handful of the mortgages in the Seaport have gone to people of color, and according to the BBJ, there are only 2 Black-owned businesses in the Seaport. And according to the Globe, the population is 3% Black and 89% white, with a median household income of nearly $133,000, the highest of any Boston zip code. And thank you for doing that. So I want to leave a little time for education. We had a number of education questions. And I'm going to ask this one. This is Kathy from West Roxbury. Boston's exam schools have once again ranked very high in the U.S. News and World Report's ranking. In 2021, number 1, number 13, and number 14 in Massachusetts.
Rose O'Brien.
For Boston Latin, number 36 countrywide. These schools are a draw to our city and provide tremendous opportunity to Boston youth. 1, can we maintain these ranks without accepting students based on citywide exam scores? 2, Metco and private schools currently provide students with the best chance of scoring high on the entrance exam. How can we prepare Boston Public Schools students from across the city to perform better on these exams? So I think at the heart of this is 1, do you want an entrance exam? And 2, if you do, how do you help people get ready for it?
So yes, I want an entrance exam to our exam schools here in the city of Boston. And the way that we help kids be not just better prepared to take a test, but better prepared to excel academically through every grade in the Boston Public Schools in particular is you hire a teacher to get it done. You hire somebody who has the experiences personally and professionally as a graduate of the Boston Public Schools, as a 13-year classroom teacher in the Boston Public Schools, as a parent of 4 Boston Public School students, as the chair of the Council's Committee on Education, as someone who has been in the weeds on this work of improving our Boston Public Schools. That's how you get it done. And for me, I'll tick off some of the main things that we have to do as a city to change the trajectory and the opportunity for success and achievement for our kids. 1, we look at this $1.3 billion budget that we spend on schools and make sure that as much as every dollar goes directly to student-facing activities, student-facing services, student-facing academics and achievement, that we are looking very clearly at grade configurations and reconfigurations. It is still too difficult, although it's being improved, to navigate the school system for kids and for families, that we are embracing high school redesign and making sure that every one of our high schools is high achieving, that families don't feel that they have failed because they're not accepted to one of our exam schools. I was proud to teach for 13 years at East Boston High and what we've been able to do with our kids. Actually, if there's a contest going on one of the news shows that Eastie's a finalist, they'll get $5,000 if you vote for them, so go vote for them. Go Eastie Jets. That we are fixing special education across the department. When we think about special education, the services and the needs of our kids, we have failed our kids. And the kids that we have failed the most are our black and brown boys who are disproportionately placed in sub-separate special education classrooms. And that happens almost exclusively because we don't have literacy curriculum in the early grades across all schools. We need to help our kids achieve and excel. We need to give them the support services, the rigorous curriculum that they deserve in every one of those classrooms to help achieve. We spent a lot of time talking about the exam schools. If we look at fourth grade MCAS scores, we know the likely trajectory and success, academic success and lifetime success of most of our kids. That's a failing of the system. If we have failed kids by the time they've entered the fourth grade, we've got so much more work to do to build on the full-time nurse I've worked to get in every school building, the full-time social worker that I've worked to get in every school building, the work that we need to do around facilities. Our kids, when they walk into school, should know that the city is proud of them, that the city is excited in them, the city wants to invest in them. We do that by making sure they're in great-looking buildings that are well-resourced. And you do that by hiring a teacher.
So let's stay on that for a second. Jane from Jamaica Plain asks, you've spoken frequently about your 13 years as a teacher and how this experience has given you a front row seat in facing the challenges of our public schools. She talks about you being a business owner as well. Can you be more specific about how these experiences have given you the knowledge and skills necessary to lead the city of Boston going forward? I would go one step further and ask you, tell me a story, and I'm watching the clock, we've got 5 minutes. Tell me a story from a moment in a classroom that backs up a teacher is the one to do this, from your time in the classroom.
I had a student once at the beginning of a school year. I'd have an index card, all their addresses, sort of vital information, a little bit of fun facts about them. And if something goes wrong in the classroom and I've got a complaint, who do they want me to reach out to? Because as someone who has younger sisters, I was actually the person that my sisters would have teachers call home for. And I had this one student who lived on Boylston Street, and I couldn't wrap my head around how he lived on Boylston Street. I'm like, for me, Boylston Street is the Four Seasons Hotel. And I was intrigued by it, so I pushed him a little bit. I said, what do you mean you live on Boylston Street? Like, where on Boylston Street? And pushed him. He goes, Miss, I live in a shelter. And I said, it was such a punch in my gut to realize that we had students in our classrooms experiencing homelessness. And this child, this young man in my classroom was living in a shelter. And it has guided me, it has driven me, his experience, and I know unfortunately the experience of 5,000 other Boston Public School kids who are living in shelters, either with their families or like this young man, unaccompanied. It has changed the work that the Boston City Council has done. It changed the work that Mayor Walsh did. No one talked about family homelessness and brought that work to City Hall the way that I did. And my greatest fear, my first re-election in 2017, my second re-election in 2019, is if I lost or wasn't re-elected, that there would be no one to continue that work and the way that I did. There's no glory, there's no reward, there's no plaque. I think I once got a framed thing from an organization in that work. And it worried me so much, and I was waiting for the state to move on this, that last year we started a special commission to end family homelessness in the city of Boston. And I worked with my colleague, my friend, former Mayor Walsh, to make sure that we had dollars in place to staff that commission so that that work can continue after my departure from the City Council, whenever that might be. As mayor, I can't wait to continue that work because it's so important for our kids across the district and their families who are experiencing homelessness to not be forgotten by the city that is charged with caring for them every single day. We have dollars in our schools now because of that work. We've got people who are paying attention to that because of my work on the City Council, and I learned that in the classroom.
All right, so last question. You're fierce. You're fierce.
I'm from Dorchester.
What's in your heart?
The city is in my heart. The city's people are in my heart. These city's kids are in my heart. And I worry about them, and I want to do this work for them. I want to lead this city in partnership with them every single day. And I want to do for them what my father did for me. what my mother did for me, what my classroom teachers did for me. I want to help our business owners who are struggling today. Last year was a terrible year for business owners across our district. I want them to grow and thrive, and I want to use our city's dollars to do that with them and for them. This city, under my administration, will stand up for our city's residents who are struggling. We'll stand up for our business owners who can't figure out how to get through that next payroll, who can't figure out how to pay for that license renewal. My administration will do this work. This is the work that I want to do every day for the people of Boston. It's the work I've wanted to do since I was 16, 15, 16 years old. And I'm committed to the people of Boston to go through, it came up in I think the debate the other day, to get through the good, the bad, and the ugly of this city so that we can have more good. I want more good for the people of Boston. I want more good for our future, for my kids, for everyone's kids at home. And I want to be able to do that in partnership with the people of Boston. That's the work that I want to do.
And that's the end of our town hall. We're done. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.